Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. Our goal in this series is to provide parish staff and volunteers and diocesan ministers the formation, training, and tools they need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, Joel Stepanek will discuss how humble leaders can take ministry from good to great while remaining grounded and focused. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. Before we begin our webinar, we'd like to recognize our webinar partners: the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter using the question section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. I will read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you later this week via email. With that, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter. Joel Stepanek is a Catholic author and speaker who serves as Director of Resource Development at Life Teen. He earned a bachelor's degree in religious studies from the University of Wisconsin in 2007, and in 2015 he earned a master's degree in religion and religious education with an emphasis in youth and young adult ministry from Fordham University. He previously served as Director of Youth Ministry at St. Francis of Assisi Parish in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and is an adjunct faculty member at Franciscan University of Steubenville. Stepanek is the author or co-author of several books, and the most recent book he authored is Chasing Humility. Joel, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Hey, thank you so much, Erin.
You're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter here. Turn the reins over to you. And
Great, we'll get our keynote going.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, great.
Great. Can we see that, Erin? We're all loaded up and good?
Yep.
Awesome.
Could put it in presenter mode, or we still see the other slides on the side.
Okay. We got that going. How about now? We good?
Yep. We still see the slides on the side, but if you want to just take it away from there, that's fine.
I wonder why that's being weird. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Because I worked so hard on my presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we're gonna have a conversation about humility, I think we might as well, make sure that we have a humbling moment.
Sure.
Right at the beginning of everything, right? All right, let's see if we can get that. I know you see that screen. Now we see the full screen.
Now we see part of your desktop. There we go.
Got it. There we go.
Okay.
All right, fantastic.
I'm gonna stop sharing my webcam. I'll come back on when you're done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Erin. It's really good to be with all of you today. Thanks for taking some time, depending on where you're at in the country, either over your lunch hour, if you're like me and you're out on the West Coast, or you're in the Pacific time zone. I'm actually in the state of Arizona. It's beautiful. It's sunny. It's like 73 degrees right now. or if you're out somewhere east where maybe it's a little bit different climate and it's the late afternoon, appreciate you taking part of your day just to spend some time with me and to learn a little bit about the lessons that I've experienced and what I've seen in other leaders on how humility can make such a difference and an impact in who we are as leaders, especially in a ministerial, parish, diocesan setting. I think the reality is all of us are leading something. There's somebody in your life right now who's following you. Now, the chances are good that if you're on this webinar, you're probably in a position of designated leadership. Somebody's looked at you and said, hey, you're the director, the coordinator, the coach, the teacher, you're the pastor, and you have people who would be considered your direct reports. You have a team of people that you lead, and you are somebody that others look to for guidance. We've all had examples of what is good leadership and what is bad leadership. And at the end of the day, I believe a key to really great leadership is humble leadership. That's the type of leadership that can make a lasting impact. And that's what we're going to break down absolutely through the next couple of slides and through the next few minutes. If you have questions through this, go ahead and send them over. And then I'm going to have a couple of things that I'll ask of you as you're watching this webinar, a couple of activities that you'll be able to engage in. So if you've got a piece of paper near you or you have something that you can write on, maybe an open document on your desktop or on your phone, that would be helpful because I'm going to throw out a couple of things that you can jot down right as we're doing this webinar that will allow us to reflect a little bit more deeply. When I think about leadership, I think about the first staff meeting I ever attended at a parish. Some of you work in parish ministry, no doubt, and so you know what a staff meeting is like. We had them every week on a Tuesday, and I was 21 years old when I first started work at this particular parish, and I remember those staff meetings well because essentially we went through and everybody gave a report, and maybe you're familiar with that, and everybody sort of went through a litany of all of the great things that were happening in their area. At times, it even felt like people were justifying their position. Look at all the great things I'm doing. Look at how well things are going. Look at all these wonderful projects we have. And no doubt, some of that was most certainly true. But there was also this feeling that people weren't necessarily being themselves within those staff meetings, that people were maybe putting on a brave face or were not sharing the full story. Now, mind you, these weren't staff meetings with everybody on the staff. Some of these meetings were just team leader meetings. They were meetings with people in positions of leadership. So when we talk about leadership and we talk about humility, we have to talk about a couple of things. And the first is authenticity, which is something that didn't necessarily come through within those staff meetings. As we take a look through the lens of leadership, I'm going to throw out a couple of leadership lies, and I'm going to throw out a couple of leadership principles that we're able to grab looking at them through the lens of humility. So before we dive into that authenticity, I want to say, what is humility when we talk about leadership? And the reality is this: humility is only possible when we have a defined sense of who we are and a secure identity in Christ. I don't know what definition you have of humility, but when we talk about it, sometimes we might have different opinions about what that means, about how low we are, how high we are, how much confidence we have in ourselves. But when we talk about a humble leadership, we have to talk about people who have an understanding of who they are, that they have a defined sense of their self and a secure identity within Christ. I love this quote as we dive into authentic leadership and authenticity as a value of humility from Thomas Merton. Pride makes us artificial and humility makes us real. When we talk about humble leadership, the first step we have to go to is authenticity. So think about those staff meetings. Why was everybody so intent on only saying the good things that happened? Why were all of these people seemingly not prideful, but not necessarily sharing the full story? That's because of this leadership lie. As leaders, sometimes we believe that people cannot see us weak. That if our direct reports, if people that we work for or that work for us see any sort of weakness, see us maybe having doubt, even see us fail, that will actually be perceived as weak. And once they smell that blood in the water, they're going to come for us or they're not going to respect us. Thinking back to 21-year-old me at that particular time, I actually remember getting advice from another leader where he said, when you step into this position as a young man, you need to be the alpha dog. You need to really show people that you're in charge. You got to take ownership of things, because if they smell weakness in you, they're going to jump all over you and you're not going to be able to command respect at all. Now, there's certainly something to be said about being in a position of leadership and wanting people to respect that leadership, but that respect has to be earned. And sometimes we think that by earning it, we actually need to go the route of that sort of alpha dog mentality, which is really prideful. As a leader, if we step into a role and we say, look, I'm the end all be all, I know what I'm doing, and if you see my weaknesses, then I'm going to lose you as a follower. We've already headed down a pretty rough path. The reality is, if we want to embrace humility as a leadership principle, we have to embrace authenticity. So if you've got that piece of paper, I've got a couple questions I want you to walk through just to test the level of authenticity that you have right now in your form of leadership, whatever that might be. So I've got 10 questions, and these are true or false questions. I'm throwing them up on the screen here so you can read through them, but I just want you to number that sheet 1 through 10, and we'll walk through these and I'll explain them, and I want you to answer them true or false. And we're going to examine that first humble leadership practice of authenticity. So here's the first question. My direct reports feel comfortable confronting me about an area where I've fallen short. So that's an area where you haven't lived up to your end of the bargain, you've missed something, you've dropped the ball, and your direct reports, the people who are on your team, the people you lead, feel comfortable looking at you and say, hey, you dropped the ball in this area. The second area is my direct reports feel comfortable admitting a failure in a project with me. So that's somebody who works for you feeling comfortable enough to come to you and say, hey, I dropped the ball here, I failed, I didn't get it right. The third is my direct reports feel comfortable admitting a failure in a project with each other. Does your team, if you lead a team, feel comfortable going to one another and saying, hey, look, I dropped the ball here and I didn't get it right? Do they feel comfortable having those horizontal level discussions? The fourth is my direct reports honestly express their frustrations, concerns, and criticisms with each other in a healthy confrontation, in a healthy way. The reality is, when we lead a team of people, not everybody's going to get along. In fact, if right now you're saying, oh man, our team never has conflict, nobody fights, nobody disagrees, people don't even get frustrated with each other, something is happening below the surface of your team that you are not aware of. Because the truth is, people are people, and no matter how well we all get along, people sometimes have disagreements, have frustrations, have concerns. The fifth is you as a leader can elicit honest feedback from the people I lead about my performance. And here's the key part, you've had at least 3 pieces of critical feedback in the last year. Do you feel when you sit down with one of the people on your team and you say, hey, can you tell me how I might improve as a leader? Do you feel they can give you honest feedback? And more importantly, have they? Here's your next set of 5. My direct reports trust what I say. It's as simple as that. Do your direct reports, when you say something, believe you? Or maybe even hear the whispers, or maybe somebody said something to you. Do people say, look, I know that when you say that, I know you mean well, but we all know what you really mean is this. The 7th is I regularly ask for feedback on my performance as a leader. Do you have ways outside of maybe an annual review that you institute that you're regularly seeking feedback on your performance as a leader? And this can be from anywhere. It can be from people on your team. It also could be from your supervisor, and maybe it's even from colleagues or peers. The next question goes along with it. I make actionable changes on feedback I receive, true or false? When you get that feedback, do you sit down, digest it, and say, okay, I've got to make some changes? The 9th is, can my team list your weaknesses? My team can list my weaknesses, true or false. If I sat down with people from your team, people you lead, and said, I need you to tell me all the leadership weaknesses of the person who's in charge, would they be able to do that? And as like a sub question, would they be able to do that with you in the room? And then the 10th is, I've intentionally brought people onto my team to help remedy an area of weakness. If you know those weaknesses, have you gone out to find people who can compensate for that area of weakness and help make up for it? Take a look through your answers. This isn't, one of those teen magazine quizzes where I'm going to give you a score and say, well, if you score below a 7, you're not an authentic leader. But I do want you to look at those statements, because all of those statements, if you answered in the affirmative, if you said true, that's a mark of authentic leadership. And the truth is, humble leadership is authentic. Now, we've been talking about authentic leadership, but what exactly does that mean? Well, let's start with the negative. What is inauthentic leadership? And it may be answering false to some of those questions kind of already pushes us in that direction. Inauthentic leadership, leadership that is not true to who a person is. And authenticity is who I am, is who I say I am, is who you receive me as. So there's 3 levels. There's who I am, my motivations, my internal dialogue, who God created me to be, and essentially the part of my heart that God sees. That's the authentic true self of who I am, the Lord who sees inside my heart. And then there's the person that I project to others, the person I say that I am, the story I tell about myself. And sometimes those two things aren't in congruence with each other. And then there's how people receive who I am, which is also important. Sometimes we look at feedback, especially feedback about our performance, and somebody gives us criticism like, the thing is, when you're in a meeting, it just seems like you're not really present. And we hear that and we think, but I am present, I am listening. And then we blow off that feedback and say, I can't believe that person would say that. They don't know me. They don't realize that I'm so invested in the meeting. But what they're receiving is also valuable, because what they're saying is, regardless of what my intentions are, what is being received is my inattentiveness. And maybe I'm doing something that is allowing me to really pay attention, like I'm taking notes on my computer. But what other people see that as is me maybe checking my email or being inattentive. So when we process that feedback of how others are receiving me, it allows us to gain a greater understanding of how we better present ourselves to those who are around. So authentic leadership comes down to the person that I am is who I say that I am, is who others receive me as. And humble leadership at its core is authentic. Inauthentic leadership produces ambiguity because those who follow you are always left guessing. So one of the questions is, people trust what I say. Authentic leadership looks at your team and says, look, we're behind on this project, or we didn't get this fundraising goal where we need to be. And what we're going to do in the next 3 weeks is take these action steps. And these are the 2 action steps that I'm going to take. And here's what I expect of everybody else. If you're an authentic leader who means what you say, your team is going to hear that and say, all right, like, we got it wrong. That was honest. And this is what my leader says that she is going to do. And I trust her. So because I trust her, I'm going to do my part. Ambiguous leadership produces a response in people where they say, nah, I don't think that she's actually going to do those things because she's swamped and there's no way her schedule is going to accommodate for that. In that case, a leadership is actually kind of puffed up with pride in a sense, because they are wanting to say to their team, look, I'm a team player. I'm going to take on these things too. But what they really are saying below the surface is, I'm just trying to do that for show. I have no intention of being able to do those things. And ultimately, I'm going to delegate them to somebody else. Inauthentic leadership creates an untouchable mentality because you never seem to fail. No one around you wants to fail either. That's why those questions I asked earlier about, does your team feel comfortable discussing their failures with you and with each other are so important. Leadership creates culture. So if we're a humble leader and we're authentic and we're comfortable looking at our direct reports and saying, look, I know I said I'd take on those 2 action items when we were going to talk about these fundraising goals, but I got completely swamped and I didn't get to it and I didn't make those goals and I'm sorry. That produces an environment in your team where people feel comfortable coming to you and saying, I know I said that I get this done, but I didn't, and here's why. Now, sometimes you might be bristling and saying, yeah, but like, isn't that an indication of poor performance? But the reality is that sometimes people are going to fail. And if you as a leader don't know their failures, you cannot help them be successful. If you don't know the areas where people are falling short, or they don't even feel comfortable coming to you for help, they're going to feel like they have to do it all on their own, and ultimately they will fail. At the office where I work at Life Teen, we have apprentices who come every summer, and a couple summers ago, we had a young woman who went through the whole summer super confident, very, very proficient, it seemed, at her job. And then at the end of the summer, she handed in this project that we asked her several times if she needed help on the project, how she was doing on the project. And it was just a complete failure. It wasn't what we wanted. It wasn't what we needed it to be. And when we asked her why she didn't ever ask for help, she told us that she felt that she couldn't, that she had a high expectation placed on her because everybody else in the office didn't seem to need any help. And I had to step back and look at that as somebody who is leading that person and say, what have I done that has created a mentality in her where she felt like she couldn't ask for help? Have I been honest about the areas where I sometimes fall short, or the areas where I don't get it right all of the time? She had a perception from me as a leader, which trickled down to our culture, that failure was not to be tolerated, and therefore asking questions that might seem to indicate failure were also not to be tolerated. So even though in my heart I said, well, I want to be a person who, I don't always get it right, what I was projecting onto others was I'm a person who always gets it right. And that can produce a positive cultural change in people. The third thing is inauthentic leadership does not welcome critical feedback and therefore never improves. So if we're an inauthentic leader, then we create that untouchable mentality where we never ask for feedback. The reality that humble leadership is authentic means that we have to be willing to go to people and say, hey, can you tell me what I can do better? Now, here's the thing about authenticity. and why that last piece is so challenging for us as leaders. Authenticity and vulnerability go hand in hand. I can't be an authentic person if I'm not allowing myself to be vulnerable with those around me. This means different things in different relationships. So what I'm talking about here is professional vulnerability. Even in a ministry setting, in a parish setting, there are boundaries and vulnerability boundaries that we have to respect with the people we work with. Sure, we pray together, we have a spiritual mission that we're in together, and we're all working towards this common big lofty goal of evangelization and parish ministry at a diocese. But the reality is that that doesn't mean that in a staff meeting we sit down and say, all right, to start off our staff meeting, we're all going to discuss our deepest, darkest hurts. Some people might not be comfortable with that, and the reality is some people might not have a relationship like that across the staff. So when I say vulnerability, especially in a leadership setting, I'm not talking about sharing all of your deep, dark secrets with all of your direct reports. What I am talking about is professional vulnerability, the ability to sit down and say, here's some areas where I'm weak. Here's some things that I'm just not very good at. Here's some places where I need help as a leader. And that's a healthy thing to do. Nobody in their mind believes that there are gurus out there in every leadership position who are good at everything. We recognize, implicitly that every person has strengths and they have weaknesses. But in leadership, it can be very easy to start hiding those weaknesses, especially from those who are direct reports who might be most willing to help us. So we have to create this environment of professional vulnerability. This vulnerability actually creates an environment where your team becomes stronger because you're as a leader able to model, hey, I want to talk about some things I'm not good at in areas I need help. Your team is then going to reflect that and respect you more as a leader, and it produces a greater empathy among team members for the roles that they have. A couple of things that you can do to cultivate this sort of vulnerable leadership is first to run an exercise with the team, which I have run with my team. And I think it's excellent, especially for you to participate in a leader, is to ask people, what are you bad at that you will never be good at? What's one thing you're bad at you'll never be good at? Especially in terms of your job, that might be a good question to phrase it as. And then what's one thing you're okay at that regardless of how much effort you put in, you'll probably always just be okay, maybe you'll get to good, but you'll never be great. Where's an area where you're good and you've kind of plateaued in that area, and where's a place where you're going to be great, especially if you put in the extra time and effort. This does a couple things for you as a leader. It allows you to share some areas where you're weak. Hey, here's some things that I'm bad at. Here's some things that I'm just not very good at when it comes to this line of work and areas where I need help. And then you might find that somebody else has a strength that compensates for that. Or you might say, as your team is talking, you find out that there are some areas where if you mentored people a little bit, they could go from being good workers to really great team members if you gave them a little bit of extra effort. So that's one thing you can do to start cultivating an environment of vulnerability. At one of your team meetings, just say, hey, we're going to discuss a question. What are you bad at that no matter how much time, effort, energy you put in, you're only going to ever be okay at? What is one area where you're okay? And like maybe if you worked at it, you might be good someday, but it's going to take a lot of work. Or where's an area where you're good and you've kind of plateaued out? And then where's an area that you could be great with a little bit of extra time and effort? And make sure as a leader, you're participating in that activity. And then here's the other practical thing you can do is with your team, hold feedback sessions that allow you to give them a conduit by which they express their feedback to you that you can act on. And this is where that vulnerability piece comes in, which allows them to see you as a bit of an authentic leader, is you're gonna ask for feedback from your team in a way that I believe is very structured and allows them to actually offer you honest feedback. Here's how this works before we get into these 4 questions. If you run annual reviews with your team, one of the questions that might come up is, hey, what can I do to improve as a leader? And that's kind of a standard annual review question. It's a nice question to ask, but here's the truth. If you're sitting across from somebody whose employment is dependent on you and your evaluation of them, and you look at that person and say, hey, tell me how I could improve. Let me know what I'm doing wrong. That person is not going to give you honest feedback. Unless you've cultivated a real strong, positive, and open relationship with that person, very few individuals are going to look at their boss point blank and say, here's some things I think you could do better, especially if I don't know how my team leader is going to react to that. So I realized that this is a challenge. And one of the things I did with my team, I have 6 people that I lead at Life Team, is I asked them all to come together. I delegated one of them to be a facilitator, and I gave her these 4 questions. And I said, I'd like you to talk through these 4 questions with our team. I'd like you to record the answers. You can record them anonymously. and then give them to me because I really want to improve and I want your honest feedback. And this way, if you do it as a group, you'll be able to produce that honest feedback without one person feeling like they were singled out. So they met for 90 minutes, which as a leader, I will admit is unnerving when people are like, we just need a little bit more time in the meeting. And they're talking about areas where you should improve or your performance. But the feedback they generated was really helpful. And these are the 4 questions. Here's why I set them up the way that I did. One is I wanted to ask, how am I currently adding value to our team? I wanted my team to be able to tell me, here's where we think you are the best for us. Because if it was in misalignment with things that I was doing, then I needed to evaluate those areas that I was putting my energy that it wasn't actually helping our team. The second is, are there any areas where I could add more value to our team? So these are places where people would say, on my team, we've identified this gift or talent in you, and if you worked a little bit harder at it, you could really add value to our team. So it's offering me an area where I could improve or grow. The third one is the question we really want to get them to is, where am I getting in the way? Where am I holding up processes? Where am I falling short as a leader? Where am I making your life frustrating? And then the last is, what needs do you have that I need to meet for you so that you can be successful? And this is a place where by this point, your team is not going to say, well, here are the needs you're already meeting. They're going to give you honest feedback about needs that aren't being met currently, but that you could step up and meet. What I like about this format is it takes all of your team members, your direct reports, and it allows them to have strength in numbers, to present feedback to you anonymously while you still know it's coming from your team and you trust the source. And it really gives them 3 questions that are worded in a very positive way, and 1 question that's going to give you that sort of critical feedback about, here's where you are getting in the way. So authentic leadership needs to model this sort of vulnerability in being able to take this type of correction and feedback. Authentic leadership is going to produce a solid foundation for your team, and authentic leadership is ultimately going to be humble leadership. So that's the first humble leadership practice. If you want to be a humble leader and an impactful leader, you need to be an authentic leader. The next one revolves around giving praise. When we talk about praise, you may be thinking, well, is this just going to be affirmations for my team members and, going around and telling them that they're doing so good? There's a little bit more to it than that. When we think about praise we receive as leaders, it's this affirmative feedback that we secretly desire. Maybe we overtly desire, but think about it, especially if you're in middle management. And if you are at a parish right now and you have any position that is not pastor, but is managing other people, you are middle management. And some of you pastors, maybe you work in a diocese and you're thinking, I relate, I am also middle management. And what makes middle management a challenging place is you're empowering people below you, but you're also trying to be the go-between between the executive management, the bishop, the pastor. And that's why praise in middle management can be something we start to crave, because we don't necessarily get praise moving up from our direct reports. They're not necessarily coming into our office to say, hey, I just want to let you know, you killed it at that staff meeting today. I mean, just really fantastic stuff. And depending on who our direct supervisor is, that person might be busy or may not have the time to give us the type of praise that we want. That is affirming the work that we're doing. So we want this type of praise. And you also know that when you're in a position of leadership, you are going to be more susceptible to public criticism than those who work for you. There's a difference when something happens in a company that the CEO is the one who's all over the news and the direct managers or the directors or the coordinators are not, even if those people might have been a bigger cause of the problem than the CEO. So when we think about all of that and we think about praise, it's easy for us to justify moments where we sort of sneak in and steal praise. And this is what I want to get at when we talk about giving praise and ultimately getting more of that feedback and more of the kind of actionable criticism that we need to work through. I call it praise plagiarism, which is a fun little tongue twister that you can try out at home. And praise plagiarism works like this. You've got a team of people that you lead. You have people that you work with, maybe even colleagues in this case, and you all work on a project together. But when you are with your direct supervisor, that person looks at you and she says, look, I think you did a great job. I just want to let you know that just well done. Really great. I'm so happy to hear. And she just heaps praise on you. And you have a moment where you can say, thank you so much. I worked hard on this project, but you know what? So did these people on my team. And I just want to affirm this person and this person and this person because they've done a great job. Sometimes we do that, but you know what? Sometimes we don't. I know in our heart of hearts, we want to say, well, I always do that. But there are times we just say, well, I can just let this one slide. Why do we do that? It's because in a way, it produces a sort of job security. It produces this idea that, well, like, there's only so much praise that could go around. And so if somebody, realizes that I wasn't the main part, then that praise is going to go away. And that leads to our next leadership lie, that praise is limited. That's why we want to sometimes step in, and we don't always give people the praise that's due. We don't let people know everybody who worked on the project. And sometimes we don't even go around and we don't even praise our direct reports, which is certainly part of it as well. And that's another part of stealing praise, is if we are keeping the praise that we could give to people and maybe they really deserve to ourselves under any number of pretenses, we're actually stealing from that person in a way. I actually had a conversation with somebody, this is several years ago, where this person looked at me and said, this person just does a great job. They're fantastic. I love what they're doing, but I'm not going to tell her because I don't want her to get too big of a head. And think about that for a second, because I think maybe we've been in that position. Maybe you said, well, here's the thing. You know what happens if you start praising millennials? All millennials want is to be praised. All they want is their participation trophies. They just want affirmation. And once you start, that's a snowball rolling downhill. And then you got to praise them all the time. So I just choose not to. Or we justify it with that sort of righteous, well, I don't want to give that person any sort of praise because they'll get too big of a head. I don't want them to get too big of a head. I got to keep them humble. But that's kind of a ridiculous thing to say. We're essentially saying, well, I don't want to affirm that person because there's the off chance it might lead them into sin. My kind words might be the new occasion for sin. So aren't I such a holy person by stepping back and making sure they avoid that sin and they live this austere work life with, no affirmation at all. And that's why I have to, step in and take the praise as well. And I think this is the thing. We have to get over this leadership lie that praise is limited. So I've got to take it when I can get it, and I've got to withhold it when I can withhold it. Because I think one of the biggest challenges for leaders, that's a dirty little thing we don't like to often talk about, is that we're afraid to share praise with other people. We're afraid to share the praise and affirmation we get from a project because it goes back to that staff meeting. What happens if other people start to say, well, are you really doing your job? I think there's a real challenge there. Now, when we talk about this, I want you to take a quick again, leadership test, and you can write this down on your piece of paper. You can write this down on your phone, but I want you to think about this. In the last week, so the past 7 days, maybe 10 days, how many of your direct reports have you offered direct praise to? And how many times have you offered praise of your direct reports to your boss? So so maybe tally them up. So again, how many times this past week have you directly praised your direct reports? They've done something, you've caught them doing something good. And you've said, hey, I want to let you know that the way that this parish event went off, just was really great. I know you had a small part of it, but just thank you for taking care of that. Even though it's something that happens every week, I just want to let you know that I'm really mindful of the great work you're doing. How many times have you done that with your direct reports? How many times have you offered that praise? And then conversely, how many times have you taken that praise and gone to your boss and said, hey, I just want to let you know, maybe you're finishing up a weekly meeting with that person and say, I just want to let you know that this person is doing a really great job. I've been very impressed with her performance. I think she's doing great. I want to let you know that we've just got a really solid member of our team. Kind of jot those things down. And then the question is, if we don't do those things, if your number is really low, why? I think, and this is a practice I've been trying to put into play as a leader, that it's key that every time I meet with my supervisor, I'm offering him at least 1 to 3 pieces of praise for people on my team. I'm saying, I want to let you know this past week, this person really did something great. I want to let you know about the awesome project this person's working on. I want to tell you I'm really proud of these people on my team and the work that they're doing. I try to always offer that and throw those things out there, because at the end of the day, and implicitly, my supervisor knows that I can't do all of the work that my team is doing. And so it's important for me to let him know who is doing that work. And then similarly, I try to praise one person on my team every day. So to find one person to say, hey, I want to let you know this has been going great. You've been doing a good job. And this is a practice I've been trying to put into place since the new year. But just to make sure that people hear that praise and affirmation every day, that the work they're doing is good and it matters. This doesn't have to be empty praise, though. I think that's key. Don't just find some empty piece of praise to offer somebody. If people are underperforming or not doing the work that they need to do, that's a different story. But we can almost always find one good thing that somebody is doing once a week to let them know that they're doing a good job. Here's the flip side of seeking praise. When we talk about humility in giving praise, we have to ask, well, what does that look like for a leader? So I just talked about how we want to be giving praise to our direct supervisors and to our direct reports, but then we have to also turn it around and say, how do we deal with negative feedback or failure? Jim Collins wrote this book, Good to Great, and he talks about all the qualities of that take a company from good to great. It's a classic. But in it, he talks about humility as this foundational leadership quality of great leaders. And when he was describing it, he talked about interviewing these incredible leaders, CEOs from these companies, and how one thing continued to come up in the interviews. When he'd ask them, hey, how have you been so successful? How have you been so successful? These leaders would say things like, I've got a great team of people, and they would start to direct the attention elsewhere. They would start to just give out praise to the people who are directors in their company, the engineers, the people just down on the line who are working, and they would never say anything about themselves. But then when issues came up about things that didn't go right, things had failed, things didn't work out, the leader redirected the attention backwards to the leader. And that person would say, well, here's the thing, I didn't do this, or this. We can get into a leadership echo chamber if we're not giving out praise and we're only seeking it. And the leadership echo chamber is dangerous because it prevents us from being humble, and it prevents people from actually giving us feedback that's actionable. A leadership echo chamber happens when people are afraid to give us actionable feedback because of how we might respond. So this, if you find yourself with everybody as a leader agreeing with you, telling you things are great, even praising you, people are always kind of looking at, oh, what a great idea, what an awesome idea. But things aren't getting any better, you're probably in a leadership echo chamber. And here's how you can break out. We have to be the first to look at ourselves when something goes wrong and say, what did I do wrong? How did I fail? How did I mess up? And that takes humility, because maybe your first response is not to say, how did I mess up, but to look to the other people on staff, on our team, and say, I can't believe that they did that. There's this quote from Pope Francis, from Gaudete et exsultate. My Latin's needs some work, folks, but I love it. The lack of heartfelt and prayerful acknowledgement of our limitations prevents grace from working more effectively within us, for no room is left for bringing about the potential good that is part of a sincere and genuine journey of growth. If you could put this somewhere as a leader that you read it every single day, I'd encourage you to do that. Because here's the thing, as a leader, when things go wrong, we are always in some way culpable. There are very few situations when something goes wrong that we are 100% innocent. And there are situations of high moral deception where we would say, I had no idea that person was living such a duplicitous life, or that I had been so kept out in the dark about this. And those matters are few and far between. But anytime something goes wrong within your organization or your team and your leader, you are in some way culpable, even if it's a small percentage. And that's why we have to step back out of that echo chamber where we're seeking praise and we only want to hear the good things. We only want to hear the happy things. We only want to hear that everything is awesome, and say, where have I gotten it wrong? Where did I mess up? Because we're almost always culpable in those situations. So here's what I recommend doing. And this is a great humility practice. Make a leadership examine weekly. And this is something you could do on a Friday afternoon. You could if you work at a church, you could go down to the chapel, maybe do a holy hour during that time. You could sit down, take 30, 45 minutes to kind of journal, write it out, and go through these 6 questions. The first is going to help us to give praise to others. Where did others get it right this week? Who is excelling, doing well at their job? Who's been exemplary? Think about that. Think about who they've been. And then this is great, because if you haven't given that person any praise, you can go back on Monday and say, hey, I want to let you know that last week you just did great. And you can give them that praise. And I think that's a great way to be mindful of how are we giving praise as a leader. And then we can ask who is struggling, who hasn't gotten it right. But here's the next question. How have I let that person down? That has to be our first question as a leader, because I think sometimes we get people in positions where they're not doing well, they're failing, they're not performing where we want them to be. And our first thought is to be like, I can't believe it. I'm so frustrated with this person. How are they not getting it right? And we need to step back and say, all right, in humility, have I let this person down? Have I failed to empower them the way they need to be empowered? Is there some level of ambiguity in my leadership that is causing them to not be the person that they need to be? Have I not sat down with them to fully explain these processes and they're kind of in the dark? Have I given them unclear expectations? You can roll through a whole litany of things to say, how have I let this person down? As I've done that, I found more often than not at least 2 or 3 areas where I'm like, yeah, these are places I could have done better. These are places I did not empower this team member. These are places where I didn't communicate effectively. And then I make a note to go back and do those things better. And then I actually have a clearer picture where if in a few weeks, in a couple months, the performance hasn't improved, I might get to a point where I say, I know that I've done all that I can, and maybe it's time that I have to let this person go. But my first step is never to be like, I just need to let him go. I need to move them on. I need to chastise this person. It's always, what have I done wrong and how could I do better? And that's the next question that you can ask is, where can I grow as a leader next week? Where can I grow in my leadership? And that may come from that previous question. Maybe there's just other areas we're saying, this week I blew through some deadlines. I didn't make my deadlines. I need to grow as a leader there. And then the next question, who do I need to ask for help in order to grow? Is there a direct supervisor, a mentor, a colleague, somebody who's good at the things you're not good at right now who you could say, hey, I'm really struggling just to stay on task with my projects. Could you help me? And again, it goes back to that first point of authenticity. That's a vulnerable thing to say because maybe the person who can help you grow is somebody on your team. For me, I manage a lot of different things, and we have a lot of projects that are going on where I work. And it just became a whole lot, and that's not necessarily a gift that's great with me, like keeping up on the nitty-gritty details. But Elizabeth, who is the assistant on our team, is great at that sort of thing. And so I had to ask her, hey, I need you to step in on these conversations to keep all of this straight. It's an area where you're gifted, where you see things differently than I do, and you have to be the one to step up. That's a vulnerable place to be because when I do that, I fear that somebody might come back, her especially, and say, but that's your job. I don't want to help you with that. Like you take care of that. Or somebody else might look at me and the fear is they'll say, well, why aren't you taking care of these pieces? And the reality is I am. I found somebody who has a greater skill set than I do, who's able to take care of those things. So I'm able to focus on the areas where I'm strong and where I need to be as a leader. Here's the fifth one. We can pat ourselves on the back for a minute. Where did I have success this past week? And then who do I owe that to? Nobody's successful in a bubble. So if you felt success this past week as a leader, ask yourself, who do I owe that success to? And again, go give them praise. Thank them. Hey, last week you really helped me with some of that writing that I need to do. Thank you so much. And then the last one is, was I a good steward of my leadership? And you could think of this if you want to go super Ignatian with it and say, if you die today and God looks at you and says, I just need you to render an account for your life of this, and also the leadership position that I gave you at that parish, at that company, at that organization. How are you a good steward of the leadership I gave you? That's a deep question, but it's worth asking. If you were to die today, would you have been a good steward of the leadership that God gave you, or did you not do all that you should have done with it? So I encourage you to make that leadership examine every single day, and then remember this leadership principle that humble leadership gives praise. Humble leadership looks at other people and gives them praise, affirms them, is the first to offer out the praise and the first to dish rebukes back to itself. Here's the last piece then. When we are leaders, we need to come to terms with the fact that we will not be a leader forever, and we need to pray this line from the Litany of Humility that I loved. It's one of the most difficult ones for me to pray, which is that others may be chosen and I set aside. Lord, grant me the grace to desire it. When we are in a leadership position, we need to always be thinking, who is the next person who could take my job, and not only take my job, but who could do it better? There's this author, James Altucher, in his book, Reinvent Yourself. He talks about how mentor and mentee relationships most of the time break down once the mentee, the person being mentored, surpasses the mentor. Because most mentors, even when they start out as mentors, don't really want to be mentors. They want a lifelong apprentice. They want somebody who constantly is their sidekick, their assistant, who never surpasses the greatness of the master. And when that actually happens, the mentor becomes angry. They become frustrated that the person they've been mentoring is actually more proficient than they are, that others are choosing that person and no longer choosing the mentor. I don't know of any place that this happens honestly more frequently than parish work. We have a lot of people who unfortunately get entrenched in positions because of fear, because they're worried that if they train somebody else to do the job the way that they've always done the job for the past 20 years, that somebody will then take that job and they won't have one. And it can be a scary place to think about, well, what does it look like if I've worked at the parish for so long, but I don't have a job anymore? Here's the reality. Mentorship is never something that is out of a job. And I think that's the thing that counteracts the lie, because the leadership lie is this: mentorship is that. If I mentor somebody, if I teach them to do what I do, if I give them all of the information, then where does that leave me? Here's the thing: mentorship is not empowering somebody to do specific things. Mentorship is giving somebody task where they take all the credit and you don't steal the praise. It's giving them tasks with the intention of them one day changing their job. And mentorship sharpens our skills. It forces us to regurgitate all of the things we've learned and to really think through the things that we've done. It actually makes us better. It doesn't make us worse. A lot of people do mentor themselves out of a job right into another job. But it is scary, and here's why a lot of people look at mentorship as death, because you're going to be a good mentor, give up knowledge you've worked really hard for. Essentially, you're giving somebody the cheat codes to the game of the job that you're playing, in the sense that, it's maybe taking you 10 years to perfect a process, but some young upstart's going to come in and you're just going to drop all this knowledge on them. 10 years of work, and they just get to start there. And we might seem, especially like if we're cynical, like, well, no, they need to work for it. I worked for it. Look, they're going to work for something. They're going to have hard times. Their life isn't going to be an easy road. Their professional career isn't going to be without challenge or adversity. But you've faced your challenge and adversity. You've laid those bricks for that person to stand on. Mentorship is not forcing somebody to do it all over again. It's giving them the cheat codes so that they can do it well today and eventually do it better. You're going to allow people as a mentor to make their own decisions and stand by during the process, even when they fail. And when they fail, we're going to say, let's talk about what we could do better, rather than, I told you that wouldn't work. I knew it wouldn't work. I knew it. Mentors walk, but it's kind of like the parent with the child on a bike when you take off the training wheels for the first time. Like, you can't hold on to him forever. But when the child falls, we don't look at the kid and be like, see, I told you, you totally lost your balance. I can't believe you did that. We say, all right, like, let's figure out a way to stay balanced better next time so that we can ride our bike. And another way that you could look at it is when you're mentoring somebody, you are going to give them the keys to the car that is your job, even if they choose a different path. So I need you to ask yourself, like, who are you mentoring right now to take your job? Who is going to step into your position when you can't do it? Who's been empowered? Who has the mind that is your mind? I had a meeting with one of the members of our team who just took a new position as associate director. And one of the things I said is, when you have questions, I'm going to try to dump all of my knowledge into you. But when you have questions about a process, or if I'm not explaining something, or there's something you need to know, ask me, because my goal is that everything that's in my head gets put into your head. Because eventually I think it'd be great if any person on my team was able to take my job. But that's not going to happen if I'm not intentionally pouring into them and helping train them for that opportunity one day. And that's what mentorship is. So who are you mentoring right now? Who on your team are you pouring into so intentionally that one day they might take your job in your position of leadership? Maybe they take a job somewhere else, but what if it's yours? Mentors are never out of a job. And that's the leadership principle. We got to become a mentor. A while ago, I was in an airport. I was sitting next to a guy. He was on the phone. I couldn't believe that this happened. He's talking to who I assume is his boss. He's talking loudly so I can overhear him. And what caught my attention, typically I just ignore people's conversations, was he said, here's the thing, you could fire me. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So now I'm eavesdropping on this guy. And he goes on to say that he's trained his team so well. This is what he says to his boss. I've trained them so well, they don't need me anymore. Like, if we got to make budget cuts, I just want to suggest that my position should be cut, because like, these people are exemplary, they're great, and they don't need me as a leader, and so if you need to make cuts, I just want to offer up my job. Can you imagine doing that? And here's the only way that guy was able to do that, is because he so firmly believed in his skill set and his ability to be a mentor that he knew he was going to get a job somewhere else. Like, that's the only way you say things like that. And here's the thing, if I were his boss, I'd have been promoting that guy. Like, listen, we need you somewhere else in this organization. It was an incredible move, but one that was done honestly, like, what a humble move. Like, it might sound like, oh, that guy was just bragging himself up. He told his boss to fire him. That's pretty incredible. But he had become a mentor, and he had mentored himself just about out of a job, if not completely out of a job. But you know what? There's going to be another one absolutely waiting for that person. So if you're looking for a way to get started with mentorship, here's a couple of tips that I'll throw out to you. One is, you need to invest in people intentionally. Mentorship just doesn't happen. You don't need to go to them and say, hi, I'd like to be your mentor. You just need to go to them and say, hey, do you want to get lunch? Let me teach you a couple of things. Take note of their projects. Offer them advice. That type of relationship will develop organically. As they see you taking an interest, they might start to ask questions back, and then you can start to really pour into somebody to take their job. Mentor relationships require regular contact, though. So make sure you're setting up a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly meeting with that person to roll through their questions, their needs. It's not just a download. So if that's one of your direct reports, it's not just a tell me what you're doing. It's a tell me what you're doing. What questions do you have? What can we work through together? Let them see your process and let them know your mind. And that's the next key, is share how you do what you do. If you have a way of doing things, explain it. Don't just say, this is how we do it. Say why you do it. Explain why you engage the process the way you do. That's key. Start by empowering somebody for specific projects, and then process the outcome and ask them questions to help them realize what they did, what went wrong, what didn't go wrong. Invest intentionally in all of those steps. And then here's the other thing. Know when to offer advice and know when to step back. This part is absolutely key, and I had a great experience just yesterday with this. We have bits of cultural programming that we do at Life Team where we talk about team culture. We have one specific segment called Real Talk that every week we publish it on YouTube. Teens watch it. It's a Catholic commentary on cultural things. And there's a really tough issue that we've been working through for a video that's going to come out in a couple weeks. And two of the people on my team, Leah and Stephanie, were actually working through this topic and really wrestling with it. And I happened to be in the kitchen as they were kind of getting stuff together, getting my lunch. And it was great because through the whole conversation, I didn't say anything. Like there were moments that I fought the temptation to be like, oh, I should interject and kind of offer this piece, but I was like, no, I'm going to let these two hash it out. They're intelligent, they are capable, and they wowed me. I mean, I was, again, eavesdropping, but their conversation was great. And I was hearing all of these things that we've talked about as a team, that we've discussed as far as mission, vision, purpose, all kind of laid out. And it was just a joy to sit there and just eat my lunch and not have to inject in this conversation, not have to have something to say, not have to step in and micromanage it, but you're two incredibly capable people who have come such a long way to discuss really big things in a way that I know is going to bless the church. And then I went back to my desk and just, I gloried in that moment. It was amazing. But the two of them were brought along in a process where they were able to do that, and it was an absolute joy. But if I would have stepped in at that moment, I wouldn't have been being a good mentor to either one of them. I would have just been a micromanager. And I think this is the last piece then. At times when people do ask you for help, though, offer your knowledge freely. Don't hold back the cheat codes. Mentorship is a total transparency of what you know, how you know it, why you know it, and the knowledge you have. The mentee gets to tap into this thing whenever he or she wants to, because this is what they need to excel and be great at their job. Ultimately, the most prideful thing we could probably do is to refuse to become a mentor and try to make somebody do it themselves. We're saying, look, my job is so important, nobody could ever replace me. And I can't think of anything, few things at least, more prideful than that. So those are our three humble leadership practices that I'll leave you with today. Authentic leadership is humble leadership. Leadership that gives praise freely and suffers rebukes, especially the rebuke I direct internally, is humble leadership. And then finally, leaders who are humble become the mentor and mentor themselves potentially out of a job, but never find themselves wanting. So those are three things you can take away, some practical pieces there for how I hope this can bless your leadership. And ultimately, humility is the foundation of all great leaders and the key to how, especially if we're a parish, we can lead not only a healthy parish, but a transformative one.
Thank you so much, Joel. Let me go ahead and take back the reins here. Here we go. So I just have to say, so much of what you've said is just really very thought-provoking, so much to reflect on. I love in your book the vulnerability that you express, the professional vulnerability, and how, at least for me as I was reading it, it really gave me hope and courage, you know, as you see other people feeling the same way or sharing some of the same feelings, and then knowing how to overcome them. We've got a lot of great questions here. People can continue to send in questions. Carlos said, thank you so much for the Leader Examine. That is just so good. Laura asked, how do you recruit new team members?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a couple of ways you could go about it. If you're looking for volunteers, which is one thing that some of us maybe are leadership for volunteers, is by direct invitation and asking people you trust. So if you have to get a volunteer team of people for some area, go to people you know rather than doing dragnet, what I call dragnet recruiting. And even then, still interview people because those direct connections will help you recruit some really quality volunteers to form a team. If you are hiring people for a team, the best thing I can do is encourage you to craft really provocative job postings. And again, ask people personally, ask people for insight. But if you want to get the right people on your team who you can lead, you have to have a job posting that's sort of provocative. I think this is something we've been trying. So if you want to just kind of see an example, we posted a couple of jobs at Life Team in my area. My team is growing, which is kind of fun. But you can take a look at those on our website. They're just examples of what kind of a more provocative job posting would look like outside of the norm, which will attract the type. You want to be specific to attract the type of people that you want on your team, and that can be done by thinking a little bit outside of the box.
Sure, great. Going back to the volunteer, Karen asked, would you recommend annual reviews for the volunteer catechists? Any other format that might work?
Yeah, and actually there's a couple of really fun things that you can do here. With annual reviews, whether it's with an employee, with volunteers, absolutely. Here's one of the things I'd kind of toss out with annual reviews. I use my annual reviews as like a visioning piece. Hey, let's talk about like some goal setting for the next year. Where do you want to be? Let's talk about if there's any areas you've thought of that you want to improve or grow. And then are there any big projects that we're going to like tackle this upcoming year? So I kind of use it as a visioning moment. The reason why I use it as a visioning moment rather than like a true review is those things happen through the course of the year. So whether you're with volunteers or employees, if I have critical feedback, it's so unfair to save that for a volunteer or an employee if it happens in February all the way for like next December when we do a review. Or if it happens in October and we're reviewing catechists in May, say, well, in October this thing happened. So I address those pieces of critical feedback within a week of them happening. And then again, when we talk about giving praise, I'm always making sure that I'm affirming people so that, it shouldn't, it's the same thing. It shouldn't be the only time a volunteer or an employee here's positive feedback at their annual review at the end of the year. So I use those things as like vision setting things. I recommend doing them annually, but making sure that you're doing check-ins for that praise and that critical feedback throughout the course of the year as needed and at least quarterly.
Mm-hmm. Great. Latrell said, she said she's always been disappointed when people equate humility with weakness. And she was actually told that crying is not professional. What do you think about showing controlled emotion?
I think that's a part of vulnerable leadership. I actually had a gentleman who I was talking with who runs a consulting firm for leadership. And one of the things he said is if your team does not have the ability to cry with one another, you don't have a good team. And again, when we talk about professional vulnerability, like there are times when, two pieces. One, there are times professionally when as a team, you're going to experience challenges and you're going to experience hurts and you're going to experience failures. And sometimes that means people get emotional, and that's okay. And that should be something that is welcomed and, not shut down at all. There's going to be other times, especially in the church. I remember, and again, candidly, after a lot of the scandal stuff broke, we had a really tough meeting as a team where we had to talk through and process some of that and some of the hurt that people were feeling. And you know what? We weren't going to move on as a ministry or as a team until we did that. And then the reality is you can't separate people's personal and professional lives. We can definitely have boundaries there, but sometimes things happen in people's personal lives that are going to impact their professional life. And we have to also be accommodating for the space there. So I think absolutely, if people feel like they are in a safe space where they can, sometimes get emotional after in a professional environment, that is a form of professional vulnerability. And I think, again, it's checking it with boundaries to say, okay, like maybe this isn't the best place to discuss some of the struggles in your marriage. But like if somebody sits down and I've had this happen, and says, I'm really struggling with this thing because I feel like a failure in this project, and they get emotional, yeah, that's got to happen. And we got to be able to be weak in that way, because once we let that out, now we can work forward to remedy that.
Great wisdom. Thank you so much. Well, our time is getting close to the end here, and I want to respect that for all of you. Joel, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your expertise. Thank you to all of our attendees also for the great questions and comments that you have submitted. We do have a special offer on Joel's book, Chasing Humility, 20% off using the promo code webinar0319, which is for today's date. And it will expire then on the 29th of March. I have to say, I've really enjoyed reading your book. And reflecting on how I can be a better leader myself, and not only in the workplace, but I think too a lot of this can transfer to our home and our other relationships. So thank you. Before we sign off, we would like to thank our partners once again, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. If you're not familiar with any of these organizations, please check out their websites, which you can see displayed on the screen. This webinar, as well as all of our past webinar recordings, will appear on YouTube, Vimeo, and the Ave Maria Press website at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. So the PowerPoint that Joel shared, you guys can access on the recording. There were several questions about that. Please mark your calendars for the next webinar in the Professional Development Series on Tuesday, March 26th, of course at 3 o'clock Eastern. Claire Swinarski will offer insight on how to empower the women in your parish to understand that to be pro-woman is to be pro-life. This webinar will help you effectively communicate about pro-life issues within your parish in a way that's dignifying, graceful, and scientifically accurate. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great afternoon.